White cops frame black woman, bring her to court, unaware she's a DEA agent. It all started with flashing blue lights and a smug look on the face of Officer Daniels. On a quiet afternoon in Georgia, 35-year-old Tiana Brooks was pulled over for what the officers claimed was a routine stop. But this wasn't routine. Not even close. Tiana was calm. Her fingers didn't tremble as she reached into the glove compartment and pulled out her license and registration. She handed them over to the officer through the open window without a word. Her eyes remained forward, fixed on the horizon, not the man in uniform standing beside her car. She had nothing to hide, but deep down, something didn't feel right. The stop had come out of nowhere. No lights trailing her for blocks, no siren until the last second. Just a sudden flash of blue and red, like a trap snapping shut. And the way the officers walked up, confident, too confident, not cautious, not curious, like they already knew how the story was going to end. Officer Daniels glanced at her papers and gave a small, satisfied nod. His partner, a younger cop with a tight jaw and mirrored sunglasses, circled the car slowly, dragging his fingertips across the surface like he owned it. They hadn't said why they pulled her over. Tiana's silence was deliberate. She'd learned the hard way that words could be twisted. So she stayed still, controlled her breathing, and waited. Minutes dragged by. Then came the request. Pop the trunk. She hesitated, her brows pulling together. Why? Daniel smiled, but it wasn't friendly. You got something to hide? No, she said slowly. But you still haven't told me why I'm being stopped. Ma'am, he said, already moving toward the rear of the car, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Tiana felt her pulse quicken. She clicked the trunk release. Her heart thudded. The trunk swung open, and within seconds, Officer Daniels was holding up two small plastic bags. White powder, cocaine. Tiana's jaw dropped. What the hell? She started. That's not mine, she said firmly. Her voice rose, sharpened by disbelief and fear. I don't do drugs. I don't even let people ride in my car. But they weren't listening. Daniels exchanged a look with his partner. A slow, triumphant nod passed between them like a private joke. The younger officer stepped forward, pulling her door open. Step out of the vehicle. You set me up, she whispered, stunned. This is a setup. Daniels didn't respond. He just pulled out his handcuffs. Click. Cold steel bit into her wrists. They smiled. They cuffed her, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Tiana wasn't just another woman to pin a number on. She had friends in high places, cameras on her dash, a sharp lawyer on speed dial, and a fire in her that had been burning since the last time someone tried to ruin her life. They thought they'd won. But this was just the beginning. Tiana wasn't just some random woman driving through town. She was a highly trained undercover DEA agent working on a massive federal operation. An operation so delicate, so deeply embedded, that even whispering its name in the wrong place could get people killed. She had spent years cultivating her cover identity, infiltrating dangerous trafficking rings, and walking a razor's edge between trust and exposure. She'd dined with drug lords, sat in safe houses rigged to blow. She'd made deals she never intended to keep. Her life was a careful lie built on silence, secrecy, and nerves of steel. Tiana had top-level security clearance, elite tactical training, and a record of successful operations stretching from the back alleys of Miami to the cartel strongholds of Mexico. But due to the depth of her current assignment, her identity was need to know. And these local cops? They didn't need to know, too. Officers Daniels and Cray, she was just another black woman in a nice car, an easy target, someone to intimidate, someone to set up and sweep off the streets, all while laughing about it over bad coffee and paperwork. They didn't know they were tampering with a federal investigation. They didn't know that the trunk they searched wasn't supposed to be opened without a warrant, not because of drugs, but because of what was really in there. Surveillance gear, coded documents, and one encrypted phone that held contact with federal handlers monitoring an international operation. Now, instead of finding their planted cocaine and walking away with a high five and a false arrest, they had potentially blown the lid off a case that had taken years and lives to build. But Tiana wasn't going to panic. Even in handcuffs, she was calm. Almost too calm. That made Officer Daniels nervous. "She's too quiet," he muttered, glancing at her in the rearview mirror of the squad car as they drove toward the station. Cray snorted. "You want her to cry or scream?" "No. I want her to act like she knows she's screwed, but she doesn't." Daniels was right to be worried. Tiana wasn't scared. She was calculating. Every minute in that back seat, she was tracking every movement, every word, every mistake. She knew the system. She knew how people like Daniels operated, dirty cops playing both sides, desperate for a shortcut to power, money, or status. She also knew how to bring them down. Her wrists ached from the cuffs, but her mind was moving faster than ever. First, she needed to get a message out. Her real team needed to know she'd been compromised, that the operation was exposed, that 2 uniformed officers had just stepped in the middle of something far bigger than they could imagine. She shifted slightly, pressing her shoulder into the side panel, aligning herself with the angle she knew the dashcam would be filming. From calmly, precisely, she mouthed a message. 3 simple words. I was set up. It was a gamble, but one she had to take. If her people were monitoring, and they always were, they'd catch it. Frame by frame, they'd see what she said. And then hell would follow. Daniels glanced again into the mirror, this time meeting her eyes. Cold, unafraid, focused. He looked away quickly. He'd seen that look before. On people who weren't afraid. To burn everything down to get justice. At the station, Cray opened the door, pulling her out roughly. "Let's go." Tiana didn't resist. She walked like she belonged there. Head high, back straight. "You think you're tough?" Cray muttered. "You'll be crying in an hour." Tiana didn't respond, because in less than an hour, the real storm was coming. Federal systems would ping the moment her identity failed to check through routine booking. A red alert would be triggered. Protocol would be activated. The DEA, FBI, maybe even the U.S. Marshals would be mobilized within minutes. And when they showed up, badges flashing and guns drawn, they wouldn't be coming to negotiate. They'd be coming for her. And for the 2 men who made the mistake of thinking she was powerless. Daniels and Cray had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. The next day, Tiana was brought before the judge. Her wrists were still marked from the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her expression was unreadable. She stood tall in the orange jumpsuit, her eyes scanning the packed courtroom. Spectators filled every bench. Lawyers, onlookers, a few nosy reporters, and several uniformed officers watching with smug interest. Officer Daniels and Officer Cray walked in with chests puffed and heads high. They were dressed in fresh blues, their badges gleaming like trophies. Daniels whispered something to Cray, who chuckled quietly. They thought this would be quick, routine, a slam-dunk case against a woman who, in their eyes, couldn't possibly fight back. They had no idea what was coming. The judge entered, an older man with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He adjusted his glasses, looked at the docket, and was about to begin reading the charges. But then, the courtroom doors opened with a quiet click. A man in a dark, sharply tailored suit stepped in, flanked by 2 agents in plain clothes. He moved with the kind of authority that made people shift in their seats without knowing why. He carried a black folder, sealed, stamped, and marked for judicial eyes only. Without saying a word, he walked past the benches, past the prosecution and defense, and approached the judge's bench. He handed over the folder. The judge frowned slightly, but accepted it. He broke the seal, opened it, and read the contents. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then his eyebrows lifted. His mouth tightened. He looked up at Tiana, then at the officers standing so proudly near the prosecution table, and finally at the man in the dark suit. The judge cleared his throat, voice rising with authority. "Case dismissed," he said firmly, startling the room into silence. "All charges are dropped. Ms. Brooks, you're free to go." A ripple of shock spread across the room like a tremor. Tiana didn't move. She didn't have to. One of the plainclothes agents stepped forward and unlocked her cuffs. Her arms dropped to her sides. She rolled her wrists once, slowly, then lifted her chin. Daniels stepped forward, confused and furious. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "Your Honor, we had probable cause. We..." The man in the suit turned around slowly. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather badge case, and flipped it open for the whole room to see. Special Agent Carter, DEA Internal Affairs. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Several heads turned, and whispers filled the air like static. Agent Carter's gaze landed directly on Officer Daniels. "You just tried to frame one of our top agents," he said evenly, voice like steel. Daniels' mouth opened, then shut. Cray turned pale. Tiana stepped forward then, cool and composed, looking between the two officers who had so confidently tried to destroy her life. "You planted drugs in my car," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You tried to bury me because you thought no one would believe me." Carter didn't take his eyes off the officers. "What you didn't know," he added, "was that Ms. Brooks has been undercover for the past 3 years, involved in a multi-agency operation with connections to international trafficking cells. Her identity was classified, but now, thanks to your actions, we've had to pull her out. You're both under investigation," Carter continued. "Effective immediately. You'll be escorted out of this courthouse. Any attempt to interfere will result in federal charges." Behind him, the two plainclothes agents stepped forward. One of them already had cuffs in hand. Daniels tried to speak, but no words came out. Cray took a step back. The judge banged his gavel once. "This hearing is concluded." Tiana didn't look back as she walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was empty except for Carter and the two agents. He handed her a plain black blazer, and she slipped it over her jumpsuit like it was armor. "You okay?" Carter asked quietly. Tiana nodded once. "I will be." He looked at her with something close to respect. "We'll be making this right. All of it." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The truth had come out. The system hadn't protected her, but she had protected herself. And now, everyone knew exactly who Tiana Brooks was and what happened to people who underestimated her. Within hours of Tiana's release, the DEA launched a full-scale internal investigation into Officers Daniels and Cray. They moved fast. No press releases, no warnings. They didn't need headlines. They needed proof, and they found it. Every piece of evidence was pulled and reviewed with surgical precision. Body cam footage, GPS logs, radio transmissions, even security feeds from nearby traffic cams. And what they uncovered was disturbing. In the body cam footage, clear as day, Daniels could be seen circling the back of Tiana's car. He signaled to Cray, an almost imperceptible nod, and just as Tiana leaned forward to retrieve her license and registration, Cray opened the trunk and subtly reached into his own jacket. Within seconds, he placed something behind the spare tire compartment, 2 small bags of cocaine. The moment was brief, intentional, but captured forever, on tape. When the Internal Affairs team cross-referenced timestamps with GPS logs, they found the officers had stopped outside an abandoned property just 15 minutes before pulling Tiana over. There was no call, no report, just 10 minutes of unaccounted time. Further digging unearthed a pattern. Daniels and Cray had a long, ugly history of questionable arrests, nearly all targeting Black and Latino drivers. 6 formal complaints had been filed against them in the past 5 years. 6, all dismissed, all ignored, quietly swept aside as unsubstantiated. But this time, they messed with the wrong person. This time, their victim was a decorated federal agent with full surveillance in place and a team watching her every move. And the DEA had everything. Within 3 days, both officers were placed on administrative leave. By the end of the week, they were arrested, booked not just for evidence tampering, but for false arrest, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. But that wasn't the end of the story. That was just the beginning. Tiana's case exploded into the national spotlight. News outlets picked it up first as a local oddity, an undercover agent framed by dirty cops. But as details emerged, the story became something else entirely. It became a symbol. Headlines blared, "Undercover DEA agent framed by local police." In shocking setup, body cam footage reveals officers planting drugs on federal agent. Justice for Tiana, how one woman exposed systemic corruption. Cable news ran panels dissecting the footage frame by frame. Civil rights groups held rallies calling for deeper investigations into law enforcement abuse. Activists demanded to know why earlier complaints against Daniels and Cray had been ignored for so long. Tiana's photo, stoic, strong, handcuffed but unbroken, circulated across the country. She never asked for fame. She never asked to be the face of anything. But now her story was a catalyst. Lawmakers began pushing for reforms in body cam review policies. Federal oversight on local departments was debated openly in Congress. In cities across the country, communities began to ask harder questions about how many others had suffered in silence, without the protection Tiana had. And yet through it all, Tiana remained quiet. She didn't hold press conferences. She didn't go on morning shows. She went back to the agency, met with internal affairs, and assisted with the broader investigation. There were other names, other officers, other cases that now needed scrutiny. Behind the scenes, she was helping build something bigger than revenge, bigger than headlines. Justice, real justice. In private, Carter checked in often. "You okay with all this attention?" he asked once, after her story aired on national television. Tiana had paused before answering. "It's not about attention," she said. "It's about accountability." He nodded. "You're not just a case anymore. You're a movement." She looked out the window. Somewhere down the hall, a junior agent was being trained on ethical arrest protocols, part of a new program sparked by her case. Then let's make sure it moves in the right direction. And it did. Daniels and Cray were later convicted, and their victims were re-examined, some even exonerated. New checks were implemented. Federal guidelines changed. Because one woman refused to be silenced. Because Tiana Brooks didn't just fight back, she changed the system. Tiana didn't just walk away quietly, she used her voice. She stood tall at a podium in front of a sea of cameras, microphones clustered like hungry mouths. The press conference had been hastily organized, but by the time it started, the room was packed. Reporters from every major outlet, federal officials, community leaders, even other agents who had quietly come just to stand in solidarity. Tiana wore a navy blue suit. No badge, no uniform. Just her truth. "I've worked in law enforcement for 12 years, she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "I've risked my life to clean up the streets. I've faced cartels, traffickers, and violent offenders. But today I was reminded that even in this uniform, even with this badge, I'm still seen by some as a threat, a target, because of the color of my skin." There was a hush, the kind that only truth can bring. Tiana paused, letting the silence speak before continuing. "I am not the only one. There are countless men and women who don't have a badge, who aren't undercover agents, who are stopped, searched, framed, and forgotten. And if this could happen to me, it's happening to them every single day." Her words went viral. Clips of her speech played on news broadcasts nationwide. The hashtag #JirpTianaSpeaks trended for 72 hours straight. Civil rights groups applauded her bravery. Community organizers invited her to speak at rallies. Parents told their children about her. In neighborhoods across the country, Tiana's story became more than just a headline. It became a turning point. Pressure mounted quickly on the precinct where officers Daniels and Cray had worked. Within days, the district attorney's office reopened every closed case they'd touched in the last 10 years. Internal Affairs launched new probes into officers with repeated complaints. One by one, stories began to surface. People who had been silenced, ignored, dismissed. This time, they were being heard. But Tiana wasn't content with just exposure. She returned to work at the DEA, quietly, purposefully. But now, she had a new mission. She proposed a task force focused on reforming communication between federal agencies and local law enforcement. Too many times, agents operating under deep cover had no protection because their identities were classified beyond local access. That needed to change. Her initiative included better safeguards for undercover agents, clearer protocols for identity verification during arrests, and stricter review processes for local officers with repeated misconduct claims. It wasn't easy. There was pushback. But the DEA listened. Washington listened, and slowly policies began to shift. Tiana also worked behind the scenes to create mentorship programs for young agents of color, those who, like her, navigated two worlds every day: the uniformed world of law enforcement and the reality of being black in America. She didn't seek revenge.